you very much. We divided into three distinct subcommittees. We had a services subcommittee that Stephanie Finley headed, and she did just an outstanding job. They looked at everything that the city does and looks at all the services that the city did. And then there was the Assets and Enterprises Committee, which looked at the enterprises of the city, including city utilities, the parking enterprises, the Memorial Hospital, and the airport. And I was on the revenue subcommittee, which was quite interesting because we had Andy McElhaney on our group. And Andy was always favorable talking about various types of taxes, but he was never in favor of voting for any of them to go forward. But at least he was very cordial about the whole thing, which I thought was nice. Here's a little bit more about services. And some of the issues that the services subcommittee looked at is what services do citizens consider essential? And, you know, we went back and forth on this quite a bit. And I really think that we need to do something to find out what the voters really want in this city. What do they think is essential? And we just can't have people running down to City Hall and say, I want this and I want that. Here's my pet project. I think it really needs to be a random sample of some sort of the voters of the city, and we need to dig into what do they really want, and then I think city council and city manager have to budget towards that. They looked at efficiency and innovation. They came up with a total of about 87 different recommendations to help city council consider over the next few years. And you can see there are some other ideas: use more volunteers, look at special districts, which I don't know that I would go for or not. And another item that I'll point out down is budgeting for outcomes. Rather than just an incremental budgeting approach, I think we should consider more, let's budget for outcomes. How much time do we have? 2 minutes? Okay, we'll be fine. The second subcommittee looked at reshaping enterprises, and their main recommendations, and Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Dan Stewart chaired it, and you know, we should give Dan a big round of applause right now. He spent tireless hours working and you know, pushing us to get this work done. So we really do appreciate it, Dan. But anyway, what the enterprise group looked at is they looked at examining the governance and ownership of Memorial Hospital. I think it is governed pretty well, but I think there are some inherent risks with a city this size owning a hospital anymore. And I think that one of the things the city council might have to look at is, do we still want to own a hospital down the road? We recommended that we change the governance of Colorado Springs Utilities, and the reason for that, it's a $1 billion enterprise, and it's large enough, it really needs a board of directors that are familiar with the operations of a utility and how to manage your utility efficiency. I think that could greatly improve overall operations. So city council's got to consider that. We also recommended that utility rates be adjusted up to market levels rather than always trying to provide the lowest rates possible. Let's get them up to market levels. Let's operate them like a business. We really didn't have any changes in the airport because of the many federal restrictions that are placed on the airport. And parking, we would have said sell it, but the most profitable part of parking are the meters, and it's not the garages, so it's hard to sell meters in space. Revenue. We tried to think about what revenue sources might be most appropriate for the city, and we never came to a conclusion. So finally what we did is we looked at, here's a list of revenue sources that the city council might consider over the next 3 to 5 years. And we gave all sorts of recommendations. We made votes amongst our committee on whether we should move these forward or not move them forward. And here are just some of the more popular ideas about increasing the revenue of the city. The one we looked at was this employment tax, which is similar to what Denver has. They charge, I believe it's $5.50 per employee charge to the employer, and then I think the employees charge another $5 per month for the privilege of working in the city of Denver. Obviously, there's one issue with that, and that we'd have to consider is the difference between city-county. Would more businesses move outside of the city just to avoid a tax like this? We We talked about targeting more revenue toward the specific use like transportation, and looked at sales tax on services. Obviously, property taxes was an issue because we did feel there was less than perfect balance between collections. Increasing the LART, I think we really could increase our LART tax significantly and nobody would know the difference. And then finally, we talked about sin taxes. You know, what's better than taxing sin? So anyway, I'll stop now, and hopefully I've generated some thought for you guys to think about. Thank you.
It's intimidating to tell a professor that his time is up.
People tell me that all the time.
Our next speaker is Dr. Penny Culbreth-Graft.
Thank you for the privilege of being here and for the invitation. I have lots of bosses here today. There are two that I would like to point out. Two council members. We have Council Member Jan Martin in the back here. And I've heard we have Council Member Randy Purvis here as well. And I hope I didn't miss any other council members, so grab them afterwards. They have lots of information. I also have my new boss on the other side, Dr. Terry Schwartz. So Terry's in the back there by Jan. Okay, so, whoop, just turn that one off. Let me get this down here. 5 principles. We're at an academic location. We need to talk about academics. The first principle being never spend more money than you have to spend. The second principle, budget with sound principles in mind. Good idea, right? Well, this includes things like, let's talk about reserves for a minute. Reserves typically are things that you can spend in a rainy day. Well, guess what? The sky is falling, it's raining and thundering lightning, but we can't touch our reserves because we have a special reserve under Tabor that says, thou shalt not touch me. So our rainy day reserve is a reserve that can't be touched, so that's not really a sound principle of budgeting. However, it is a principle that we do have to adhere to. So there are a couple of others up there that I mentioned. Number 3, never use Aunt Ida's birthday money to balance your budget. One of the problems that cities have had over the years is that they have been forced to think creatively. So when they're thinking creatively, what happens is they're really great at finding one-time sources of revenue for ongoing expenses. You wouldn't pay your mortgage out of one-time money, but cities all over the country have been doing it for decades. That's one of our problems. We've been able to provide service because councils and staff want to provide service. That's why we go into programs like public administration, because we want to provide services to our residents. But what happens is we're so good at finding one-time money that we then end up getting out of balance, and our budgets truly aren't balanced. So that's one of the things that we're dealing with from a historical perspective. The next principle, be transparent, be simple. But let me tell you the problem with that. This is my budget book. We give to council members along with all the other things that we give them. This is double-sided, and we say this is only one of maybe 40 documents that we used in preparing the budget. We have lots of things going on there. We've got $2.7 billion in assets that show on the city's ledger sheets, but we're broke. How do you explain that to people that don't come through UCCS and understand those concepts? We've got proprietary funds, fiduciary funds, 70 different types of funds just for the city of Lone. Gaps, shortfalls, revenues, surpluses. How can a surplus be a surplus when you have to give it back to the people and you don't have enough to run your city, but you give them a credit of $2.10 on their utility bills and it costs you $80,000 to do that? Go figure. Those are all concepts that we deal with. You look over here at some of the acronyms: CIP, CPI, GIDs, IGAs, MSAs, PFAs, different things. Who would have figured? PPACG, PPRTA, all of those things are so complex, but yet our charge is to be as transparent as possible. We are transparent. My goodness, we have no privacy in life. But it is very difficult and very complex. So in all that transparency, people don't get it, they confuse it, try to explain it, clarify it. It just gets more complex.